Oh my God, you're
Hello and
amazing.
welcome to GB Face. My name is Sahar. I'm the Global Voices managing editor. This is our weekly Hangout series. This week we're going to be talking about post-revolution elections in Tunisia and Ukraine. We're joined in Tunis by Ahmed Median, our Tunisia author, and in Washington, D.C. by Tanya Lokat, our RUNET editor, who is also from Ukraine. And she's currently specializing in protest movements and social media. Um, so recently, about a week ago, both Tunisians and Ukrainians went to the polls for parliamentary elections. And post-revolution, there's been a lot of emotion about wanting new blood, but at the same time, new systems. So I was wondering if we could start by Tanya, if you could give an overview of what happened in Ukraine and what were the feelings like, and what were we seeing on social media?
Well, so the revolution in Ukraine, which took place sort of during the winter and spring of 2014, was kind of what people called it the revolution of dignity. And a lot of it was about fighting corruption, and a lot of it was about fighting the old blood and trying to clean out from the government the people who were there, who were just there to get rich and not to actually help citizens make a better life. So the elections, and especially these parliamentary elections that were last week, were actually aimed at reforming the parliament with the hope that then the new people who could come in could actually, rewrite the laws and clean up the mess that the country has been going through. And so a lot of people were like, well, that's exactly what the protesters were fighting for earlier this year. So to some extent, this happened. To some extent, there was obviously a lot of new blood, a lot of new people who were selected to the parliament, but also a lot of people who were still the same ones, and so a lot of people were somewhat disappointed in the results of the election. Ahmed, would you say it's something like that in Tunisia, or was that a different situation in Tunisia?
Um, I think it was the same maybe during the first elections where for sure, people wanted to have new faces to the parliament, people wanted new parties, and people wanted those who were opposite, opposing the regime for so long to have their say finally. Um, I wouldn't say the same for these elections, last week's election, because actually we had um, the total different case. We had like a total opposite case where all of these people, older people who were there in the first parliament, did not make it for the second parliament. Yeah. But interesting, if I want to add something interesting that you say it is a revolution of dignity because this is exactly what we call it here, revolution of dignity and freedom. And it's kind of I wouldn't say funny, but how the media has called it the Arab Spring for so long. Nobody really paid it much attention to how local people call it in here, and we don't really use the word Arab Spring at all. I mean, never really, if any. Um,
Yeah, it's a nice brand, but yeah, exactly. I think the same was sort of true in Ukraine because the protests that started in Ukraine initially started because of a specific reason, because people were unhappy with the old government dropping the European Union Association Agreement and everything that was connected to that. And so the word Euromaidan stuck, as a kind of a European Union related protest, but it was actually much more than that, and it very quickly grew into something that was just a lot of people of different ages, social groups, just dissatisfied with how their government was running the country. And so it was really a revolution for basic human rights and human dignity. So yeah, I agree with you there.
mhm.
And in terms of online platforms and social media, so a lot of the conversations around it in mainstream media have been about, the revolution was pushed by youth activists who have access to the internet, and it allowed them to congregate and organize. And what we've been seeing in both Ukraine and Tunisia is one of the good things that hasn't really been reported is that a lot of these young activists got together to build platforms for monitoring or just raising awareness about elections. Tanya, could you give us a bit of an overview about what's been happening in Ukraine?
Yeah, so Ukrainians have and sort of civic organizations have actually been using online platforms and social media for a while now to monitor elections. And the previous parliamentary elections in 2012 were kind of the peak for crowd mapping, where we had several crowd mapping initiatives happening at the same time, where people could just, drop their violation reports in their polling stations onto a map and submit their stuff either through text messages or just, go on the website or call someone or email someone. This time we also had crowd maps. There were slightly different ones, some were the same, but we also had a lot of different hashtags, which to some people was kind of confusing because it's really cool when you have one hashtag that everybody knows and it's really easy to monitor. This time we had like 5 or 6 different ones, and I mentioned that in the piece I wrote for Global Voices, that it was sometimes really hard to actually track all the reports because there were so many different sort of threads of reporting happening.
And Ahmed?
Yeah. I think I saw the starting of something. We definitely had the crowd mapping this year. I don't know if that actually worked to a full extent where everybody could or had the opportunity to put on their results and the violations everywhere around the nation, or was it just like a capital city effort, right, for a few group of people? But I've seen like a beginning of trend, and I want to just stress, this is I mean, before the past elections, we were a complete dictatorship where you could not do anything at all. In the past in the past elections, people started, thinking, oh, there's these experiences abroad, where these people have done something, and now people have acted on what they conceptualized earlier in the past elections, and now they had funds to create platforms. But still, I think when I did also like an article on GB about like 3 online initiatives that were done to monitor the elections. They were good. They were there, and they had like some kind of use. But I think I could see very well the limiting of the funding that they had. So basically, the use was very like concentrated to a small area and like small group of people who know how to use technology and how to really and who cared actually, to post their violations. But I think the trend is growing. I can tell you one thing. So when I was observing, a lot of the observer groups, organizations introduced this like text messaging thing where like if you see something, not if you see something, but like there are some a list of questions that you have to answer about the irregularity and just the mechanism of like starting the polls, for instance, in the morning. Every observer had to text back their organization on like check, like true or false, like not true or false, sorry, like check, not check, like was this done, was this not done.
Mm-hmm.
And there was at least instant in the manner that people could just speak of it as it was happening. If there was a violation, a big violation, people could just track that at the very moment and get some proof for that, which was not in the previous elections, I would say.
I also want to add that in Ukraine, one other thing that was happening besides the crowd maps, this was more kind of a pre-election thing, but people were, what they were doing was they were compiling websites with information on the candidates. So because there were a lot of new people who were running for parliament, and B, there were also a lot of old people from the party that was previously pro-government and very corrupt, who were also running for parliament and trying to pretend like they were totally innocent. So several civic organizations actually published like a roster of all the candidates and their backgrounds, and you could just come in and search for a particular person by their last name or their first name or whatever, and just find out like who they were if you had no idea who this person was and whether you wanted to vote for them. So I think that was also pretty useful. Did you have anything like that?
I think we had a different system where people did not present themselves to the parliament as individuals. We had lists, so it was really harder to track, like individuals per se. We had this website where you could they would give you like questions on specific topics and you answer, and then they will match you with your political party that that their message resemble what you think think should be done in the next phase in this country. So we had that, not individuals.
Well, in Ukraine, because our electoral system for parliament at the moment is 50-50, so it's 50% party lists and 50% single ballot candidates. So we had kind of a mix of both. So you could, as you say, you could do this like fill in this questionnaire and find out which party is closest to what you want, or you could go and look at the individual people also. Yep.
We have a few questions coming in. So we have one from Kevin Rothrock, who is Tanya's co-editor for the RUNET project. Do Ukrainian right-wing nationalists have an unusually large social media presence? Is there anything unique about these groups that provides is there anything unique about these groups that provides Russian media propaganda with ammunition to frame Ukraine as awash Nazis?
Well, actually, the nationalists have a surprisingly small social media presence. I mean, I can imagine that, you know, as much as they're demonized in the Russian media, they're really hardly noticeable in the sort of general political landscape. And the interesting thing, though, is that, of course, there were some parties and groups that were running for parliament that were right-wing or nationalist or both, but they got a very, very small percentage of the, of the vote by the end, and that was kind of something to gloat over for Ukrainian media, because they were like, oh, oops, you know, didn't Russian media say that like the nationalists were like taking over Ukrainian government and parliament? Actually, you know, they didn't get that many votes, and you know, the sort of like the parties like Svoboda, which is a nationalist party, and the Right Sector, which is the right-wing organizations, they got very small percentages. So they maybe got like 1, 2, 3 people in parliament, but you know, very, very, very few. And that was kind of it wasn't exactly a surprise, but I think it was something to gloat over for the critics of the Russian media and their hysteria over the right-wing influences in Ukraine.
Just off the bat of that, Amit, so in Tunisia there's this hysteria with Islamists, right?
Yeah.
And the larger framework that we've been seeing the Tunisia elections framed in mainstream media has been, oh, seculars came to power, so this is working. This revolution is working. What is the internal narrative? And you know, things on the outside, certain parties are always branded as Islamist, but within a lot of Middle Eastern countries, they don't necessarily have that brand. So what has it been like in Tunisia?
I think the process has been frustrating, I would say, for me, and I think for some people, maybe my age, because you know this concentration, like from the media, especially Western media, on like Islam sort of like pushes or like reinforces the message inside the country. So sometimes like they will say things that will please outside, or like they would have like some sort of echo outside. So for instance, I can tell you, I mean, anything besides another party, the main Islamist party, would be pretty much secular, because not really parties really do not, it is not really Tunisian to vindicate like religion within like a political framework. That has not been done. I mean, at least not during the dictatorship, at least not now, since 40 years. So you have that, like where another party is the only one that comes and presents sort of an alternative model, because they say it and they shout it and they're like, we're Islamists and we believe in that, and this is our message. But the thing is, I think the process has become banal, where every time it is either like, oh, it's like for instance, for the first elections, it was like identity politics. Who do you want to be? Do you want to be like the kind of like liberal secular country, or the like conservative Islamist country? And that had its like moment and stalled for at least 3 years. Now it's like, do you come back? It's like, okay, do you get what I'm saying? Like, is the comeback? Is the seculars going to win back the parliament? But I mean, if you look really deep down, this is not really the problems that are going on in the country. Like people at large, at least for myself as a young person, I do not care about Islamists versus secular, because I don't think that's gonna change anything. Especially we have a constitution now that sort of regulates where you can go in either directions, right? Either an Islamic direction or a secular direction. What people want now, we want reform. Like I want to vote and not secular versus Islamic. I want to vote on, should we increase tax by like 2% or 1%? Should we, like, I don't know, increase wages, decrease wages? Should we, like, allow free education? Should we, like, add fees to education? Should we, like, mandate that every Tunisian citizen have healthcare? Um, this is the issues that I really want to talk about, at least in the next elections, and that I want Western media as well to talk about, really push people here to talk about that, because if they don't do that, if they really keep it to secular versus Islamic, this is like a lot of Tunisian politicians has been comfortable at this. Like they become comfortable, talking just about this, us versus them, and I don't think that can. I don't think that's gonna help us in the long run if we just stick to this.
It becomes
Um,
an easy scapegoat also, right, for them.
yeah,
They
it,
don't have to
you
talk about
know,
the real issues. They don't have to talk about taxing. They don't have to talk about education, about health, the things that really, really need reform. And we see this like across the world often when Western media is talking about elections in country, the larger framework is completely disconnected from the internal conversation um, that is happening. So one thing I thought was interesting comparing these two cases, Ukraine and Tunisia. So in both cases, so within Tunisia, unlike other Middle Eastern countries that have kind of gone through this process, we do see people who were associated with Ben Ali, the dictator that was deposed, participating in elections. And
mhm.
similarly in Ukraine, we see a lot of the old oligarchs also participating in elections. So what has the tension been like on the ground, or has it been this is the way to reform? We need to keep them in the system, and we just need to accept it. What has the conversation been like? Would you like to go first, Emmett?
Um, Okay, it's been really, in any democracy, if you have this thing, people will have different opinions about it, and it's perfectly okay, right? A lot of people have been saying, these people have the money, the wealth to invest in the country. These people had, participated in previous governments. They know how this country works. They know the laws. They know the regulations. They've done it before. So maybe if we tweak their personality, if we take the dictatorship out of them, and we put them in like an open democratic framework, then maybe this time they can do a good job. Granted that they had done a good job before because people were saying, the economy was not super bad, like in 2005, 2006, before the crash. But other people say if you've been, part of a regime that really, was so corrupt to its teeth, that World Bank had talked about it, the other countries have talked about it, people have lived it. I mean, how much of an honest person and how much of an alternative can you really be um, in a time like this where you're not really the only one? These candidates are not really the only solution out there. There are so many people who had came back to the country or had matured themselves to be able to serve this country. And if they had not been part of the previous government, they're not associated with crimes. They're not associated with corruption, and they did not, just give a blind eye where, a lot of atrocities were happening in the past regime. So there's that. I mean, there are people who would be like, okay, I'm willing to forgive and let go and look forward to the future and see what these people can give. There are other people who would be, no, I mean, they cannot just go past it. I think for a single mother who had lost her child or her kids, because they were killed by the previous regime because they dared to say no. And then you have someone coming back who had condoned that in the past and coming back and say, hey, I'm gonna, I don't think that, I don't think it's gonna be easy for them. It is not easy for me. Interesting.
And you, Tanya?
I think in Ukraine the issue is, again, since it is a democratic election, everybody gets to run. But I think the concern with the old guard coming back and trying to, keep their seats in parliament was mostly the only reason they want to keep the seats in parliament is not because they want to make the country better or more European, but because they don't want to lose their warm seats and their money and their power and their connections, and all the sort of corrupt dealings that they were engaged in before. And B, because they are the old guard and they have their old habits, which are really intransparent and corrupt, the way they were trying to get people to vote for them was also very kind of old-fashioned and shady. Like, a candidate or his reps would come into a village and like try to bribe people with like food or other gifts, and to just get like old, grannies and stuff to vote for them just based on that. Like, the grannies would often have no idea what his political platform would be, but they would be like, oh, well, he brought us some food, so might as well vote for him. And so for a lot of people, that was the issue. And, not the fact that these people were trying to run, but how they were doing it and the reasons for which they were doing it. And that, I think, was very upsetting to a lot of the people who were very active during the protest, because they were like, well, this is what we were fighting against. It's the old, outdated culture that we're trying to eradicate, and we see it coming back. And so that, I think, was the most disappointing thing.
What kind of tips do you have for activists that are working in similar situations? So with the mainstream media narrative being so different from what's going on the ground. So for example, in Ukraine, all the focus is on conflict and Russia and the Russian media narrative. And in Tunisia, the focus is on, the larger Arab Spring, and this is the cradle of the Arab Spring, Tunisia. So the exceptions in both these cases are completely eradicated. So what kind of tips would you give to activists that are working in these kinds of situations where the mainstream narrative is so different from what's going on the ground, and how you can shift that narrative?
I mean, I think that in terms of, if you're an activist who is working for some organization or a grassroots campaign that is trying to, hold transparent elections and make that happen, it's really important to be connected with the networks and sort of be at that spot on social media where you know who to target and how to target different groups of people. So it's really important to just like know the lay of the land and know who you can go to that can help you spread the message. And I mean, the election messages are always really simple. We want transparent elections. We want to teach people about their candidates. We want to educate people about how to report election violations. And again, just to have those messages be formed in a way where, yes, we recognize that, we're in a conflict, we're in a difficult situation, but the reason we're holding these elections and the reason we want these elections to be transparent is because we want the conflict to come to an end, and so we want to select a parliament or a government that is, transparent enough and strong enough that they can work to, to help make the situation better. So I think it's about crafting the right messages and knowing the right people and being connected to the right networks. And then, the tools themselves are, I think, secondary. I mean, you can use maps, you can use text messages, whatever works. But if you don't have a clear message and if you don't know which networks to kind of hook into, then, the tools will not help you.
So, Emma, I have a slightly different, I'm going to tweak it a bit for you, the question. With Tunisia, how do you get out of that umbrella of the Arab Spring, but at the same time you want people to pay attention to what's happening in Tunisia? So how do you turn around that narrative?
I actually I noticed a trend here. Tunisia is not often in the hotspots in the media, so the media only talks about it if there's something really huge that happens. That allowed us some comfort to actually do our own thing, not really be pressured of, what do they think about us, as in the case of, for instance, for Egypt, where everybody was looking what Egypt is doing, or Palestine, for instance. What I've noticed as well is that people are learning, because a lot of groups, a lot of NGOs are doing things for the very first time, where they might have just seen, like it's something, a model that had worked, abroad, and they want to remodel, whether like a developed country or like an emerging country, and they want to remodel that in Tunisia, and oftentimes, sadly, it didn't work. Like the experience have not been successful. For instance, you have like a group of people who build like like a cool platform, right? But then they don't have enough funding to carry that or to scale that, or to propagate that so that everybody use it, and that we do something with it. Oftentimes it's just like the platforms that here, it's for instance either like Open Data, OpenGov, like monitoring the elections, are just like small initiatives for like a small group of people, and at the end of the day, these are initiatives that are not scalable, and these are initiatives that will be like unspoken of like in 2 years. It would be just like one person's deed, and that is is that what I hope for this country is that there will be more and more like partnerships with either even like countries like it doesn't have to be like like I don't know, France or like America, like these countries have been democratic for so long. I would say countries like Georgia, like who are really experimenting with what it is like to live in a democratic framework, and how can we do better, and how can they do better, and how can we learn from them, how can they learn from the experience at least here for 4 years. This is what I would hope, is that we would go really outside and really like focus on learning, and really implementing what we learn, rather than just like um, conceptualizing. Like, just like, ideas are cool, right? Ideas are good, and the fact that we go out there and we learn from other people is really nice. But I just would like us to come to a time where we implement things, or at least if we do something, scale it to a point where like the whole country can join in, and not just like few groups of people in the capital city. If that made sense.
Yeah, thanks. So we have another question from Kevin. I was hoping we could wrap up, so I'm just going to give half of the question, and then maybe we can say our last points then. So he's wondering, with all this like competition of values and frameworks within elections, how is it possible for us to be able to read citizen social media and get an honest sense of what people are thinking and feeling?
I think it's really difficult because, we say read social media, but each person who is on social media kind of has their own stream that they form and tune like a radio station. And so my social media might be really different from Ahmed's social media and different from Kevin's social media. So, and of course it's impossible to like look at social media, even in a particular country, kind of as a whole and say, well, is this an honest reflection? So if you follow journalists from particular outlets, I follow a lot of citizen activists, and so of course my social media picture is skewed towards what the activists are saying and doing. And if you follow pro-Kremlin bloggers, your picture is going to be super different, because it's all going to be about what the pro-Kremlin bloggers are saying about Ukraine and Russia, etc. I think in terms of representation in general, there is a wealth of opinions represented on social media. So, I'd say hopefully it's possible that all the opinions are out there, but I don't know if it's possible to like get all of them if you're just one person trying to survive on Twitter and not be like flooded by all the information.
Do you have something to add to that, Ahmed?
What I've been doing recently is I look at everything with a grain of salt. Just to be honest, like I think my social media stream as well is very biased. It's like very biased to what I think and what I feel about where this country is heading. Just not there. But sometimes when I go on Twitter, and even when we have these things where you watch TV, sometimes you interact as well as social media. I really try to look at everybody and what they think. And sometimes it's out there. You can hear it. It's on the. We have more. One thing that happened, like that is good here, is that we have more platforms for debate, and more like open for everybody, where everybody can just say whatever they think without feeling either guilty or ashamed or like bad for it. And that has been beneficial, because I get and other people get to hear what other people think, and that is cool. In terms of social media, I think people get to say what they think. It is not very different from the larger narrative that is in the country, but I don't know if this is a hard question. I think it's important to just look at everything and take it with a grain of salt. That's what I would say.
And also, I think it's very important, as we are becoming individual consumers of media, for us to go the extra mile and force us to include people in the conversation that we don't like to listen to. For example, in my Twitter feed, I follow a few well-known Islamophobes, and sometimes they make my blood boil. But I'm glad that I'm listening to what they're saying, so I at least know the larger framework that we're operating in, because these people have a lot of leeway in the larger conversation about stuff like that. And I also follow some politicians within certain countries that I just I wish, I wish the system, they did not exist in the system. But I just follow them to kind of get a feel of what they're saying. And I think it's very important as individual media consumers for us to kind of force ourselves to, be a part of that conversation. Thank you for joining, Tanya.
Yeah.
And Ahmed. This was a really interesting conversation. I didn't realize there were that many points of comparison or similarities or differences, and it was just a really interesting framework to work around. We're going to be joining you guys next week on GV Face. We're going to be going to Mexico and talking about the horrific incident about the missing students and the involvement of the government in criminal gangs there. So stay tuned for that next week. Thank you for joining, Tanya from DC and Ahmed from Tunis. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.